Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt. Today I'll be talking about the art of journaling as a means of digging deeply into our own soul, a subject dramatized across all three titles in Paul Schrader's Man in a Room trilogy. I'll be focusing on the initial entry in this trio of films, First Reformed, released in 2017. In each of the films written and directed by this American filmmaker, a middle-aged, unmarried professional drags a messy past into the center of his story. At issue are a few questions, including whether the hard-won insight granted by the central figure's difficulties can somehow illuminate the path of a younger, equally troubled individual. All three older men retain distant ties to a culture of violence, one ratified by either military service or race-based extremism. Can a familiarity with aggression that has either condoned or created bloodshed in the past be reshaped into something beneficial in the present, rechanneling combative impulses to benefit many at the expense of a guilty few? If someone continues using physical force to problem solve, does this disqualify him from romance? Will he find that violence has so hardened him that he can no longer express tenderness or compassion? Has each film's main character really changed in their new occupation, serving as the pastor of a tiny congregation, traveling about as a card shark, or playing the role of artisanal gardener? And finally, do these new professions constitute true corner turnings or failed transformations? In an effort to answer such questions, these three films also consider the potential benefits of introspection, specifically of recording the day's activities in a journal that houses one's worst thoughts and most degrading failures, as well as any small successes. Do we benefit from replaying the ups and downs of a given day, engraving our faults in our memory as we inscribe them in a book? Or is this discipline a little better than storing broken, rusting car parts in one's backyard? I have friends and family who attest to the benefits of tracing the twisting route taken by their emotions in notebooks that they regularly trash. This way, they don't have to worry about others misinterpreting their thoughts, or worse, flinging any crap they chose to share in a moment of vulnerability right back at them during a later argument. Others enjoy returning to details jotted down years before, so they see how far they've come, perhaps tracing God's faithfulness through hard times, reminding themselves that the really hard stuff often has a limited shelf life. My dad recorded the curves of our family every night before bed as I was growing up, and gave me my own diary when I was in elementary school. I wrote down a tidbit every day for about a week, and then once every few months before giving up altogether. I suppose I didn't find my own life that interesting, preferring what others had written to anything I could come up with. I hadn't yet discovered that navel-gazing, though kind of gross and smelly at times, can yield something more memorable than belly-lint. I jotted down a few words every now and then while in college, and wrote in a journal regularly while Tracy and I were apart for a year after she graduated. I returned to this practice the first year we were married, a rather challenging time for two independently minded people figuring out how to truly love one another despite all those idiosyncrasies that had seemed merely quirky while dating. I had a lot of issues to work through, and though Tracy and I have since learned to regularly share the grime of our respective lives, at the time, journaling helped curtail the number of arguments we had. These days, I'm far more likely to pray while going for a short walk in the morning than I am to write anything down in a diary. I must admit, though, that those leather-bound journals with crisp ivory pages at Barnes & Noble do tempt me every now and then. Not everyone has an incredibly accepting, forgiving life partner, yet we all desire a listening ear that's slow to judge, a close friend, therapist or spiritual mentor, and yet how many of our calendars are so full that we can't imagine offering this precious service to one another. Overscheduling has definitely been a problem for me much of my adult life. I totally get it. Too often, professionals today resemble single-scull rowers in a regatta, so intent on pushing towards the finish line that we spare little time to look around. Whatever our current social situation, journaling offers a low-cost way to process our lives, one potentially far more useful than seeking escape by way of image-heavy media, says the professor who loves film and teaches it as often as literature. The isolated, modern protagonists of Paul Schrader's trilogy have reached a similar conclusion, an attempt to come to terms with who they are by putting pen to paper. Pretty archaic, right? Narvel, the central figure of the third film, Master Gardener, used to be a white supremacist willing to kill black people on whom his grandfather put a bullseye. He turned state's evidence against his own family a few years earlier and now lives incognito as the lead horticulturalist in a vast holistic garden. Limited to his employer's grounds, journaling remains an integral part of his private rehabilitation, a slow process of countering the violent racism inscribed in ink across his skin. The gambling expert in The Card Counter, who gives his name as William Tell whenever he steps into a new casino, also wears a large tattoo across his shoulder blades. Quote, "I trust my life to Providence. I trust my soul to grace." Schrader pulled these lines from Michael Bean's World on Fire, a song which plays in the opening scene of his 1992 film The Light Sleeper. Bill makes only enough money at cards to pay for life's necessities and opens his journal every night in a hotel room whose furniture he has wrapped with the many white sheets carried around in his luggage. Enclosed within a sound-deadened space, very unlike the barren cells where he once tortured prisoners at Abu Ghraib, Bill writes down difficult spiritual questions connected to the principles he wears on his back. Though he seeks to embrace grace, he wonders when the weight of his past actions will be finally removed, and what role he has to play in the expiation of those sins which continue to haunt his dreams. The central figure of the film First Reformed, the opening salvo in this relentless series about brokenness, loss, and redemption, lives in relative solitude, having lost his wife to outrage and grief when the son he had encouraged to enlist died in Iraq. Unable to serve any longer an institution he believes prosecuted an unjust war, Ernst Toller leaves his position as Army chaplain and takes a post as minister to a tiny congregation in New York State. Attendance is about 10 on a normal Sunday. Though now living in relative obscurity, with only occasional visits to the nearby megachurch which pays his salary, Toller has yet to find the peace he seeks. He appears to be experiencing what St. John of the Cross called a dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual and emotional struggle in which God feels unknowable and prayer difficult. In the film's opening, Toller begins a program of intense daily journaling, intending to flay his conscience with each stroke of the pen, to dig down into the very depths of his soul. Over the course of the film, Reverend Toller's latent uneasiness about the current state of our planet grows stronger, spurred by the anxiety of a distraught parishioner. For Toller, this heightened interest involves no redirecting of his attention away from spiritual things, but a multifaceted exploration of the many ways our treatment of the earth impacts the individual as well as the planet beneath our feet. Toller is no materialist. He's fine with living simply and sparingly and wears his clerical garb everywhere, even when completing menial tasks like cleaning the toilet or collecting trash from the church graveyard. He does care about the material world, however, the earth which generates the beauty he occasionally allows himself to enjoy. He also recognizes that a warming planet has a disproportionately negative impact on the sort of vulnerable people groups Jesus commanded his followers to care for. This issue draws Toller into community with climate activists and other like-minded folk, providing him much-needed friendship and a social justice mission he can get behind. It also provides the pastor an arena for wrestling with the arrogance that he believes ended his marriage and continues to dog his steps. Keeping a diary is supposed to be a way to humble himself, a form of private confession, but when he looks back at what he's written after a few days, he thinks, "When I read these words, I see not truth but pride." I wish I'd not used the word pride, but I cannot cross it out. If only I could pray. Communicating with God via traditional prayer eludes him at the moment, so Toller considers other means of connection. In addition to journaling, he recognizes that, quote, "the desire to pray itself is a type of prayer," a longing that remains relatively constant as he moves towards decisive action, which he also considers a type of prayer. The question, implicitly forwarded by the film as it moves towards its unexpected climax, becomes, what array of behaviors will a just and merciful God, who understands the various competing factors shaping every action we take, actually receive as a form of prayer or worship? This film explores and questions some rather surprising possibilities. What do you think Schrader is trying to say ultimately? And which of Toller's actions, those manifestations of the swirling thoughts recorded in his journal, does Schrader wish us to applaud? Does journal writing appear to have helped him? Has it ever helped you?